Hello and welcome, everybody. My name is Bernie Wolfstorff. I am the managing partner of the Wolfstorff Rosenthal Immigration Law Firm. I am delighted to have the privilege today to update you on the critical issue of U.S. travel. We're going to update you with all the latest information. I see we've got quite a large group joining us today and thrilled to have you participate. Joining me today in our presentation is our long-standing partner, Avi Friedman. Mr. Friedman is known worldwide as an expert in the area of consular practice, and he will be doing most of the discussion today, updating you with all the new and somewhat intricate rules relating to travel inside and outside the U.S. We're only dealing with U.S. travel today, travel in and outside the U.S. This will impact everybody, including U.S. citizens, permanent residents, and I think now we have a critical mass. We'll be ready to start in a minute. I will go back to the beginning. I wanted you all to focus a little bit on that particular slide. So today's presentation, critical U.S. travel updates, will be running about an hour. I encourage everybody to ask questions. We will try and leave some time at the end. But please feel free to use the chat function. Please keep your questions as short as possible. We'll try and get through all of your questions and try and provide some succinct answers. So again, our topic today, critical U.S. travel updates. We do want to provide our standard legal disclaimer. This presentation does not constitute legal advice. It is for informational purposes only. And if you are seeking a legal opinion, please schedule a consultation with one of our attorneys. You can reach us. Check out our website, wolfstorff.com. We're going by the new brand name, WR Immigration, because nobody can spell my name, and very few can spell my partner, Cliff Rosenthal's name. A little bit about our firm today. Our firm WR is on the move right now. We have 7 offices. We recently opened Boston. We'll be announcing a new addition, another San Francisco office. That'll be our 3rd Bay Area office. So expanding in NorCal considerably. Pardon me bragging, but the award that I'm most proud of is our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Workplace Certification, which we received this year. So very proud of that particular award. The growth of our firm is based primarily on high-quality legal services together with innovation and technology. This is our next-generation immigration management system. It is a cloud-based, based on a cloud-based technology, incredibly robust. But let's focus on the question which you are all most interested in. Again, there's myself, although I do point out the picture's a few years old, so I'm fibbing a little on my age. There's Avi Friedman, my partner, A. Friedman at wolfstorff.com, and I can be reached at bernard@wolfstorff.com. I am going to go back to the slide that I started off with. This week, the State Department summarized the issue relating to consular post delays. When you check visa wait times, and again, the phrase is visa wait times, you will get a link to the various consulates throughout the world. Some of them will say 999, 999 days, which really just means nothing is available. Some of them will say 400 days for a visitor's visa. Some of them, I was so surprised, I checked Tokyo, 2 days. So the situation today in regard to getting a consular appointment for a visa is absolutely chaotic and depends on where you are applying. Try for Russian citizens, good luck. Nothing happening in Moscow. They've got to go over to Poland to try and get a visa or another place. If you happen to be from Japan, it's probably it is a very smooth operating framework. And the State Department says that it's the pandemic's fault. I'm not here to get into politics, but it's fairly well known that the State Department lost a lot of good people during the prior administration. And whether it's that fact or the pandemic, together with the pandemic, I believe it's both, has severely disrupted its visa processing capabilities, and it is prioritizing urgent and critical visa services. So those people who require tourist visas, good luck. Those people who are eligible under the visa waiver program, you're a whole lot better because you don't need a visa. But if you need a visa stamp in your passport, and what is a visa? That is a picture of Abe Lincoln. It's a plate in your passport, and people who need that in order to enter the United States are going to see a lot of problems, and that is the focus of today's presentation. So here is the priority, and this is a direct quote from the State Department. Posts that are able to provide additional services. So it varies from post to post. Some are only going to deal with urgent and mission critical services. Others are going to prioritize immediate family members of US citizens, makes a lot of sense, spouses and children. Immediate family members of US citizens. Adoptions, makes sense, we can't leave the babies alone. And fiancés are starting to move, although the fiancés have been stuck, thank goodness for litigation, and certain special immigrants, that's going to be the Afghan refugees. We're processing a lot of those cases, and they are starting to move. In the third category, we have posts that are also able to process non-immigrant visas. Wait a second. Also able to process non-immigrant visas? And they are prioritizing urgent or mission critical travelers. So if you happen to be a visitor or tourist, it's going to have to be urgent or mission critical travelers. Is Disneyland, a visit to Disneyland, fall under urgent or mission critical traveler? Absolutely no. Foreign diplomats, of course, they're going to get their visas. Here's the good news. I know we've got a lot of students and exchange visitors on tonight. You are a priority category. So you can be less neurotic. I'm not really encouraging travel, particularly if you come from one of the countries where they are only applying limited visas, but they are in their third category prioritizing students, exchange visitors, and lastly, temporary employment visas. That's your H, that's your O, that's your L, that's your E, that's your... So the work visas, which is primarily what our firm handles, are right at the back of the pack. So the fact that President Biden rescinded most of the Trump travel bans honestly does not mean that your local consulate is going to be able to schedule and provide an interview, which means travel is not going to happen. You can try and shop around to third country posts. Avi, what are you seeing in regard to, you're known as the expert on third country national processing in Canada and Mexico and sometimes shopping for friendly consulates in Europe and elsewhere. What has the attitude been lately? I know you've had some successes. You got a gigantic victory last week for a very sick person, and you got an emergency appointment and managed to get them in. But what is the general situation that you are seeing in regard to third country nationals, that is, a citizen of country A applying in country B or Canada or Mexico? What's the response been there?
So the priorities in these local countries are always to the residents and citizens of those countries. And so what we're seeing in historically third country national friendly consular posts, meaning in Mexico and Canada, is quite a bit of limitation just because of limited consular resources and availability for locals there. So for instance, in Canada, most of the US consular posts that deal with non-immigrant visas just have humongous backlogs. And so they can't even deal with their own residents and citizens. So there's not much options for third country nationals unless you are able to qualify for an expedite. And we'll talk about expedites and emergency appointments in the latter part of our presentation. Flipping over to Mexico, south of the border, they had historically been very friendly to third country nationals. And during the pandemic, again, because of their limited appointment availability, the issues with the pandemic, what we've been seeing is that they took away the option for third country nationals to apply. And it had been limited to visa renewals. And so now for third country nationals, those that are not based in Mexico, it's really limited to those that can qualify for emergency visa appointments only. So if you're coming from the States trying to renew your visa, you have to be able to qualify for an emergency appointment if you're going to try in Mexico. And even for Mexican nationals or Canadian nationals, for instance, for a visitor visa, it's also over a year or emergency-based appointments. The work visa categories in Mexico have better availability. In Canada, though, they are quite backlogged.
Very helpful. Thank you, Avi. So you're still having some limited success, but it's not like the good old days. And bearing in mind that we are so close to the holidays right now, I think we can forget about trying to get appointments this year in Canada or Mexico. Is that correct, Avi? I mean, you're just not going to get an appointment unless it's a life-threatening situation.
Something super urgent, right?
Got it. All right, so here's the roadmap for today's presentations. We are going to focus very heavily on vaccine requirements. If this presentation starts getting boring, I am sorry, but vaccine requirements just aren't the most exciting topic, but we do have to know them. We do have to be familiar with the rules. And what we have seen is this gigantic shift from country per country restrictions based on nationality through to the more realistic issue of COVID rates. And yet, interestingly, if you're from a country where there's less than 10% of people vaccinated, so they know you can't get, they have exemptions for that group. But good luck trying to get an exemption if you're from a country where vaccination is available. And I'm going to emphasize that exemptions are going to be very, very difficult to get under the new framework. Now, previously, we used to do something, so we had these travel bans, and we used to get something called a NIE, N-I-E, and we've been really busy the last year or two processing NIEs, a very frustrating process. Some of them were taking a month, 2 months, blah, 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 and they then became valid for up to a year. The bad news is, yeah, you fought really hard to get that NIE, and it's going to become invalid very soon. All right, moving on. What to expect with scheduling a visa appointment at consular posts? I've already given you the news, but we're going to go even deeper into that topic. Then we're going to talk, of course, about expedited visa appointments in these emergency situations. And then finally, for those people who will be traveling and who listened to our presentation last year, we do this presentation every year. Plan ahead, plan ahead, plan ahead. How many times do I need to say plan ahead if you want to do holiday travel? We're going to give you some tips on which documents you should be traveling. So new vaccine requirements for travel to the U.S. There we go. Avi, tell us a little bit more about this November 8th thing that happened? We were literally told 3 or 4 days before November. Well, we were told in October, oh, there's going to be this new requirement. You're going to have lots of notice. And I think we got 24 hours notice. As usual, they rolled it out with virtually no notice, the new November 8th guideline focusing on vaccinations. Avi, tell us all about it.
So up until the recent Biden presidential proclamation, the follow-through from the Trump administration into the Biden administration focused on geographical COVID travel bans. And so we had seen many countries, if you had been physically present in those countries, you would be banned from coming to the United States unless you qualified for a national interest exemption, an NIE. And so President Biden issued his presidential proclamation, which rescinded the geographic COVID-19 travel bans. And what we're seeing is that the government is now adopting a COVID-19 vaccination requirement, and that's for all international air travelers, as well as those that are coming in through the land borders. And so this new policy became effective starting on November the 8th. And so what we're seeing now is, regardless of whether your travel is essential or non-essential, if you're fully vaccinated, you are now able to enter the United States. And so what we're going to be focusing in on is explaining what is fully vaccinated and what is the proof that you need to provide, along with, if you're traveling by air, a negative COVID test. And it's either going to be within 3 days or 1 day, depending on your status.
Very helpful, Avi. 3 days or 1 day test, depending on your vaccination status. And you use the phrase fully vaccinated. This is the new phrase we have to get stamped into our head. It's the new buzzwords, fully vaccinated, fully vaccinated. So Avi, tell me, what does fully vaccinated mean?
So fully vaccinated, these are all terms that are promulgated according to CDC rules. It's not Department of State guidelines, it's not Customs and Border Protection. This is all coming out from CDC. And so to be fully vaccinated, you can see here in the various bullets, it basically means it's been at least 14 days since you have had your full vaccination dosage. So if it's a single dose like the J&J, it's 14 days since you've had that dose. If it's a double dose, then it's the 14 days since you had the last shot. If you mixed and matched, it's 14 days since the last dose. And it's important that the dosages were taken at least 17 days apart.
So if you had an absolutely critical situation, you'd probably go for the J&J because that's going to be the fastest way to get in. Is that it?
Correct. Yes. That's a one shot. Then it's 14 days after. If you're going with the other dose, the other vaccinations, then you're going to have a longer lead time until you're fully vaccinated.
And I had a crisis case already on, this person was scheduled to arrive on November the 9th, and that would have been the 13th day since their second shot. And of course, they missed the flight. There was no ways you were going to get an exception because they were 1 day short after their second dosage. I'm going to keep using this phrase, plan ahead, plan ahead, plan ahead. And, we're not going to get into the anti-vax situation or discussion, but if you decide not to get vaccinated, you can pretty much forget about travel if you're a foreign national. So, Avi, talk a little bit more about what are the accepted vaccines and what happens if I come from Russia.
So you'll see the accepted vaccines are those that are listed either by the FDA or are emergency use listed by the World Health Organization. So again, it's not our immigration agencies that are making these calls. This is all based on the FDA and as well as the World Health Organization. And so your typical ones in the United States are going to be the Johnson & Johnson, the Pfizer, and the Moderna. For internationally outside the US, so we're looking at Janssen, you're going to see some of the other ones, AstraZeneca, Covishield, the Sinovac, Sinopharm. And so the Russian vaccination, Sputnik, is not listed. That's probably one of the major ones that's not covered. And so what it means is, you have to qualify by getting one of these vaccinations to be accepted, unless you're going to be able to qualify for one of the limited exceptions.
But Avi, if I just had Sputnik, am I really going to want to have another one like 1 week later with the second one? That's kind of a little creepy. But
it is. But if you want to be able to travel, if you're Russian and you've got a valid visa and you want to be able to travel to the United States, you'll have to have an accepted vaccine, and that's not on the accepted list.
Got it. So this is quite an issue based for certain nationalities, whereas others not so much. And Avi, of course, a lot of people don't need visas to travel. They can come in under the visa waiver program. How many countries do we have on the visa waiver list now? It's over 30, right?
I believe so. Yeah, so they still, nonetheless, they also have, whether you have a valid visa or you're traveling under ESTA, you've got to have the accepted vaccination, unless you have an exception.
Got it. So it's vaccine. We hear it every day, but gosh, we are in a pandemic. So let's get into this thing. What is the proof? What is the document? What is it they want to see? And what's going to be acceptable?
So the proof of vaccination, really, when you're traveling internationally by air, it's up to the airline and the aircraft operators to confirm A, that you have the vaccination, and B, that you're fully vaccinated. And so you have to be able to prove it to when you're checking in for your flight, the airline is confirming all this information. And so in some countries, you're going to have other ways versus, let's say, in the United States, you'll have other ways. But at a minimum, to confirm, it could be either paper, it could be digital proof. There needs to be personal identifiers. And so, for instance, in Europe, you might have proof via a QR code. In the United States, we get our, the vaccination cards that you get from the pharmacist, which is just handwritten. So that's going to be considered proof. It could be a photo image of your vaccination card. But at a minimum, there must be personal identifiers, which means your name, your date of birth, and then they're going to match that against your passport when you're traveling internationally. And if your proof of vaccination is in a language other than English, it's going to be a good idea to have a full translation of that document as well.
It makes a lot of sense. Many people know this, but the U.S. government, CBP, they have put a very heavy onus on the airlines and aircraft operators. If they refuse admission to a passenger, the airline gets fined very heavily. And as a result, the airline that is now going to be the primary gatekeeper is incredibly strict. Airlines, if you don't have adequate documentation, you're not going to get on that plane. You're not going to board. You can make all the noise you want, but they're just going to be dug in because they are terrified of getting those CBP fines when people are refused admission. So the gatekeeper happens prior to boarding, and you may well be stranded. So good luck with that one.
It's very similar to our geographic travel bans. It was the same thing. The airlines were making the determinations about where people were and has the 15 days happened since you were in a travel ban country. So I think, the airlines at this point are up to speed in terms of dealing with these types of issues. And what's interesting is once you get on the plane and you make your way to CBP, what we had noticed, at least with the geographic travel bans, is that CBP wasn't double checking or cross-referencing what the airline's determination had been. What's going to happen with the vaccinations, we don't know yet when it comes down to airline travel. Of course, at the land borders, it's going to be up to CBP to review this vaccination proof.
So in some instances, maybe if people can enter Mexico, they might find it easier driving up from Tijuana than they will trying to board through pre-flight inspection in Dubai, for example, where the CBP guys are as well. Avi, let's talk about exceptions. I briefly spoke about national interest waiver exceptions. Are there going to be any exceptions, national interest exceptions in this regard? What's the new framework? How does it operate, and why is it different from what we previously had, the old knee exception to having a vaccination?
So the whole point, from my understanding of why this current administration shifted from geographic to vaccination, I mean, it really is based on the science of it from their perspective. And so they made it quite clear when they were going to go to the vaccination rules that there's going to be very limited instances of exceptions. There was not going to be this broad range of getting around the rules just because you were in a geographical location. So the number one, as you mentioned earlier, Bernie, is all those hard-earned national interest exceptions that folks earned to get around the geographic travel bans became invalid and void as of November the 8th. So they mean nothing as of this point. Those only got you around the geographic travel ban and had nothing to do with your vaccination status. So to be able to qualify for a national interest exception, they really haven't promulgated any rules yet. They've given authority to issue these limited NIEs to the Secretaries of Department of State, Transportation, and Homeland Security. But what we're thinking, since no rules really have come out yet, and we're already 10 days into the new rules, is that the prediction is that CDC is going to be the one that has the authorization to review the request for the exception and decide on whether they're going to grant you a limited national interest exception. But I would imagine these are going to be quite difficult and very few that you're going to see.
Avi, just thinking back broadly, you and I have both done vaccination waivers way before COVID. There were certain people who were morally opposed, and we used to put together these declarations and these legal briefs because vaccination's always been a part of the medical for a green card, right? So we've done these from time to time, people who had religious, etc. And I think we had pretty good track record on winning those based on moral and religious grounds. What's your prediction moving forward for that type of waiver request? You think we got a chance?
Yeah, I mean, there's two contexts, and we're really focused here on the non-immigrant side. So from a non-immigrant side, whether you object on a moral basis or religious basis, that's not going to get you an exception. So if you're applying for a non-immigrant visa or admission under the visa waiver program, that's not going to fly. In the immigrant visa context, there are vaccination rules, and the COVID vaccination was added to it. And my understanding is there are some ways to try to qualify. But yeah, that's a whole nother waiver process that gets submitted to the Immigration Service for review, and probably now will be under consideration and review by CDC as well.
And that's the, that's a key distinction. Avi, of course, is correct. But the reason I raised that is we've been working with CDC for many years. And honestly, they are one of the most rigid and difficult agencies to work with. Getting a waiver out of CDC, communicating with CDC, not easy. But then again, those are our scientists. Those are the folks we're going to have to trust. They know what they're doing, in my opinion, but we have never found them to be very flexible. And they're not that interested in your compelling sob story about how you've been separated from your family or your children, blah, blah, blah. They are rigid. But Avi, let's talk about some other exceptions. What about that happy little kid? He happens to be clearly under the age of 18.
So as of now, children under the age of 18 are accepted. Those who participated or are participating in clinical trials for a COVID vaccination, and if it's determined by the CDC director, can qualify. Those that have a contraindication from a medical perspective, and you can see the requirements, having a doctor document what the issues are, along with the identifiable personal information. And those types of documentation would be provided to the airline when you're checking in for your flight.
So wait a second. So you've got a letter from the doctor, and they're arguing your case why you cannot, and you're trying to check in, and that person behind the counter is going to make the decision? Is what you're saying?
That's the way they set it up.
Good luck with that. Half the time I read a doctor's letter, I have no idea what they're even saying. Never mind making a determination, but I guess that's the way it's going to be. And I think we're going to have some very inconsistent results, but hopefully, because what I've noticed, Avi, in some countries, doctors are incredibly conservative before they will put their signature over something which says, absolutely critical, this person absolutely cannot be vaccinated, whereas in other places, people are a little bit looser. So I'm a little worried about these standards, but let's move over to the next question of humanitarian and emergency exceptions. What do we expect to see here, Avi?
So this is, it sounds great, but it really is limited. These are for really critical humanitarian or emergency exceptions. This would be something like a medical evacuation, where you don't have time to comply with the vaccination requirements, and that you're traveling to the United States for your health and safety, and didn't have time to either to be considered fully vaccinated. And so the route that they've suggested is that you need to reach out to your local U.S. consular post to be able to qualify and get the exception granted by CDC. Or if you're a Canadian citizen, I guess you would be reaching out to Customs and Border Protection and having them arrange for the coordination with CDC. But this is quite a limited exception.
I nevertheless think, Avi, you're going to be very busy with these over the next few years, because this happens to be your area of expertise. Let's move on to the topic of limited vaccine availability. We well know that in many countries, vaccination rates are very low, mainly African countries. So, Avi, what's happening over there?
So I believe there's a list of about 50 countries, and you can click on the link that we provided. And so the rule is that if you're a citizen of a country with less than 10% where the population is vaccinated with any available COVID-19 vaccine, then you can qualify for this exception, provided you're not traveling to the United States as a visitor, either the B1 for business or B2 for pleasure. And so to be able to qualify, you need a valid passport to prove your citizenship, and you need a valid non-immigrant visa, and you need to be able to prove that you're from one of these qualifying countries. Now, we're going to get into, just because you have limited vaccine availability, depending on how long you plan to stay in the United States, there are some attestations and requirements that you will need to be vaccinated once you reach the U.S., and we'll get into that detail shortly.
Well, that makes quite a bit of sense, because, we're going to let in people who are, well, obviously they're going to have the COVID test, so they'll be okay. But the fact of the matter is that they still potential risk of spreading because the lack of vaccination. So let's carry on with the exceptions, obviously for our military, and who else, Avi?
So we've got members of the U.S. Armed Forces, their spouses and children. One of the key factors here for those that are U.S. citizens or you're a U.S. permanent resident, you're exempt from the vaccination rule to be able to get back into the United States. But one of the key points to remember is, even if you're exempt from the vaccination, if you are vaccinated, the testing for taking a flight back to the United States must be done within 3 days. So you've got to be able to present a negative COVID test. If you're a U.S. citizen or permanent resident and you're unvaccinated, you have to take that negative test and provide that within 1 day of your flight.
And Avi, what kind of test? Is it any test? Is it that Walmart test, or is it a specific type of test, to your knowledge?
I believe the rapid tests. It's the it could be a rapid, it could be the regular test, but the airlines will normally, what'll happen before your flight, the airlines send out emails to remind you and give you links to where you can get it and which tests are acceptable. But sometimes you can get those done, but the key is you need to be able to present those results when you check in for the flight.
Yeah. I did a trip to Cabo in Mexico, and I left myself about 2 hours before, and I only just made the flight. The clearance came through literally 30 seconds before boarding. A little bit stressful, but the bottom line is I made it as a U.S. citizen and did it just a few hours before boarding. Avi, what's the story with essential workers? And firstly, who is an essential worker, and how does that impact the situation crossing land borders?
So why don't we move to the next slide then, Bernie, since I think we cover that in more detail here. So what we
I think it's really important, Avi, is, I mean, you're explaining it, but when you're arriving by air from an international port versus appearing at a land border, they seem to have two different sets of rules. So understand, at least in the past, in my opinion, crossing at the land borders has been much easier than air travel, but Avi is going to update us on the new framework.
So since March of last year, the land borders had been shut down to anything except what's considered essential travel. And so as of November the 8th, the land borders have reopened up to those who are fully vaccinated and are traveling for either essential or non-essential. And then starting in January of 2022, everybody who's coming through the land border must be vaccinated, both essential and non-essential. And to clarify, what is the difference? What is essential? What's non-essential? Non-essential would be somebody coming to the United States to visit for pleasure. So, Bernie's example of going to visit Disneyland or going to visit, family, friends, pure tourism type purposes is considered non-essential. Essential travel generally are going to be those that have work visas, students that are traveling to the U.S. for academic purposes, as well as those traveling to the United States for undergoing medical treatment. So that would be considered essential travel. The point, again, just to summarize, if you're considered to be essential travel, you have maybe about the next month and a half or so that you could travel through the land border without being vaccinated. But if the borders are opened up again for non-essential travel as long as you are vaccinated. And so the other key difference between air travel and land travel is that when you're coming through the land border, you do not have to have proof of a negative COVID test like you do with the air travel.
Which makes almost no sense, but that's the way it is. So when you're crossing via land, you don't need to have that valid COVID test, which again doesn't seem to make a lot of sense.
I think, Bernie, the reason they do that is there's a lot of, cross-border traffic. You've got people on the both Canada and Mexico side that travel every day or every other day for it could be work. They live on the Canada side or Mexico side, and it would be quite a burden to have them get tested almost every day.
Absolutely, I understand.
I mean, it makes sense for some people, maybe not for your typical visitor, but yeah, I think it should have been a little bit more.
I get it. For the commuter. I mean, there's even kids American citizen kids who live in Mexico and go to school in America, cross over daily. They walk across the bridge, and requiring them to do a test every day wouldn't make sense. So I get why, but it's such a patchwork. One of the reasons I scheduled this webinar, quite frankly, is I have to learn this stuff myself. We all do. I don't see how you can be an immigration lawyer if you can't advise your clients on all these technical rules, which have completely changed from what we had prior to November the 8th. So, Avi, assuming we're not vaccinated, tell us a little bit about the post-entry vaccination requirement. And also talk about how this is enforced, if at all.
Well, those are good points. So those that have been exempted under this new policy, number one, you have to agree to get fully vaccinated within 60 days of arriving into the United States, or unless CDC grants you a longer period of time. And the key is that you plan to stay in the United States for more than 60 days. So those that are staying less than 60 days would be exempted from having to get vaccinated. Same thing if you're too young to be vaccinated, so under the age of 18. Again, the medical contraindication. So if you have a medical issue that prevents you from getting vaccinated, similar exception, the clinical participating in a COVID clinical vaccine trial, broad category for diplomats, and then those that are exempted by CDC from having to do the vaccination. So again, very limited exception. So if you are planning on being in the United States for more than 60 days and you don't fall into one of these exceptions, you're going to have to get vaccinated. Now, how this will be enforced, we don't know yet. I don't think we've seen the follow through. You know what CDC is going to see. I know in the immigrant visa context, where people had some types of communicable diseases and it was spotted during the medical exams, what we had seen is that the local Department of Health were contacting the people to notify them and have them follow through with requirements. So that may be the next steps that we're seeing once.
I was just thinking about this. I mean, a self-serving attestation, you fill out a form, say, I promise to do this after I'm admitted. And I think it's good you reminded us. And then clients used to get emails from like the LA County of Health saying, hey, you better come in and do this thing, but they don't have any teeth. So I'm just wondering. Anyway, tell us a little bit more, Avi, about the CDC's post-entry testing and quarantine requirements.
I know there were some.
Now we're talking not about, we're talking about quarantine, or I really want to focus on what is this. If for persons not fully vaccinated, they have to quarantine or self-quarantine. We don't have quarantine hotels like some countries do. So what is this all about?
Yeah, there have been some questions, I believe, in our Q&A about the quarantine requirements. And so this really is applicable to those that are not fully vaccinated. So number one, CDC has said you must get a COVID test within 3 to 5 days of arriving in the United States, and you must self-quarantine for 7 days, even if you do have a negative test. And then there's the provision, unless you've recovered from COVID in the last 90 days. And then there's another sub bullet to this that involves unvaccinated children, and those are aged 2 to 17. They are still subject to the 24-hour pre-departure testing requirement. And that gets extended if they're traveling with a fully vaccinated adult, then it increases to the normal 3-day testing requirement. So just because they don't have to be vaccinated, there still is the testing requirements.
I see a lot of people getting tripped up with all these technical rules. Even after this webinar, I'm going to have trouble remembering all of these things. And one of the things we're going to do after this webinar is actually send this PowerPoint out to you and use it as a resource for future use. I will, of course, put the qualifier. It may be out of date in a few weeks, but at least now we do have a single source document which will have all the rules, and this will be available to all of you who registered. We had a pretty good registration for today's presentation. All right, so now we're moving on to our final topic. I think we're doing okay on time. Thank you for the questions. We are going to try and get to them, but I'm going to leave them at the end because chances are we've answered some of them already. So let's talk now about consular posts. Again, I've been talking about how Avi is the expert with consular practice. Consular practice is different. You can get status from immigration. You can get approvals from immigration. But if you need a visa, which is a stamp in your passport in order to travel, then you're going to have to go to a consulate. We've spoken about some of the problems there. Avi, what's your one-liner on the situation with regard to the situation at U.S. consular posts and preparing for international holiday travel?
So I go back to what you said in the beginning, Bernie, and the Department of State quotes. The point is that these geographic bans have been lifted. The floodgates have been opened, and it's all boiling down to vaccination. But the Department of State hasn't really done anything to improve the backlogs from the visa perspective. And so the bottom line is you need to be prepared for delays, backlogs in terms of obtaining visa appointments at posts throughout the world. We're seeing some slow improvements at some places. Other countries still are dealing with the pandemic, and that's impacting appointment availability. And so, when you're trying, number one is trying to get your foot in the door and booking the earliest appointment that you can. And sometimes that's going to be far out. It could be a year out in 2022. Once you've obtained your visa interview, then you should have the option to request an expedite if your circumstances warrant the expedite. One of the really useful links that we've posted here is the wait times on the Department of State. You can search, I think it's any U.S. consular post in the world. You punch in the city where the embassy or consulate is located. It's going to tell you the wait times for visa appointments, and they break it down into work visa categories and visitor visa categories. And so you'll see that availability, and it's a general guideline.
Are they
it's
accurate,
not always,
Avi? Are those
usually
accurate?
it's fairly accurate. And a lot of times, though, for countries that deal with third country nationals, the accuracy is for local residents and citizens, not necessarily third country nationals may have a whole different calendar available to them. So, that's the first step, is see what are the wait times. And then the other thing too, we have this other point here about visa issuance. In theory, these new COVID guidelines in terms of vaccination is not supposed to impact how a visa officer adjudicates the visa application. We saw during the geographic travel bans that consuls were refusing to issue visas based on the fact that somebody was subject to the presidential proclamation. The COVID vaccination is not supposed to be one of their considerations at this point. It's left up to the airlines. It's left up to CBP. It's not supposed to be a factor whether somebody gets a visitor visa or an H-1B or an L or an O. But, is there a chance that a consul may ask the question, are you vaccinated, and take it into account when they issue a visa? It's possible, but technically that's not supposed to be their determination.
Well, I agree with you and not, but in practice, I think a lot of consuls are going to ask the question.
Right.
And my speculation is if you're not, they are not going to get into it, but they're going to find another reason to not deny you and say, sorry, 214B, blah, blah, blah. 90% of denials seem to be 214B, and that's something the consuls just throw at you. And so I don't know. I'm not sure I would risk it if I am not vaccinated and think I'm going to get through an American consular interview. So our topic again, preparing for international holiday travel. I was listening to the radio and there was holiday music, and honestly, it felt pretty good that we're getting into the season of holidays. Been a tough year or two for all of us, and a lot of people want to travel. And our message, of course, is advanced planning for international travel. Now, this slide, Avi, our last slide for today, and then we'll go to your questions. As I see we are running out of time, this slide provides actual guidance. So assuming you are going to apply for an H-1B visa or an L visa, Avi, tell us what are the basic documents you're going to need? Because I don't want to read 300 checklists right now. Just fill us in on what should we be doing before we try to get a visa.
Well, I mean, the minimum that you need is you always want to check your passport validity. Make sure that it's valid for at least 6 months beyond the period of your intended stay in the United States, so that your admission to the U.S. doesn't get limited due to passport expiration. If you've got it, you're going to need a valid visa to be able to return back to the United States, unless you're qualifying for automatic revalidation for short trips to Mexico or Canada. So you need to have a valid visa for the most part to be able to return from international travel. You should always carry, if your immigration status is tied to a petition-based application, the original Form I-797, that's your approval notice. In theory, a copy should suffice, but we always recommend that you have your original. You always want to carry evidence of your full maintenance of status in the United States. So all prior immigration documents, if you're working, an updated employment verification letter, updated pay stubs. If you're in dependent status, you want to carry proof of your relationship to the primary visa holder. So this would be the birth or marriage certificate. If you're traveling pursuant to a pending adjustment of status, you must make sure that you've got a valid advance parole travel document to be able to re-enter the United States, unless you're one of the limited exceptions of having an H or L visa. And then, of course, for U.S. permanent residents, you need to have your valid permanent resident card.
Very helpful, Avi. Let me push you a little bit on this. CBP has published some guidelines. I'm a lawful permanent resident. I've been outside the United States. My card is expired. Are there any sort of COVID exceptions for people with expired cards, people with replacement cards pending? Any latitude in that area? Sorry to throw that without prep.
Well, I mean, they did publish guidelines to the airlines and the regional carrier group as far as what's permitted for permanent residents. And so, yes, if the card's expired and you filed the I-90 to replace your card, you can travel with an expired green card plus the receipt. If you've got a valid reentry permit, that's also another option for you. And, but the real key thing that I think CBP is really looking at is how long you've been out of the United States for. So whether you've got a valid green card or not, that doesn't necessarily mean you're not a permanent resident, but they're looking at, did you maintain your residence? I think that's the bigger question.
Abandonment,
an
right?
issue. Yeah, whether you've abandoned your residency by being out for too long.
So a little reminder, people, the basic rule is try not to be out for more than 6 months. If you're out for more than a year, technically your green card is dead. They may give you some leeway if you have good documentation showing circumstances beyond your control. Maybe you were looking after a sick parent or something, but don't push your luck too much, because as Avi explained, they will look at how much time you spent in the U.S. over the past few years. So everybody thinks, well, okay, I'm going to get in now, but then they look at your history and see that you really haven't been living here, and you can expect, if you're a permanent resident and you haven't been living here, you will see something called an NTA, notice to appear. That is the worst thing that we can get in our business, because that is a notice to appear in front of an immigration judge for a removal hearing. So please be careful, permanent residents who are outside the U.S. Avi, your presentation as always is just incredible in terms of your knowledge and detail. Let's go to some questions. I'll start off with, if I'm in the U.S. on a TN visa, that's the visa for Mexican and Canadians, can I leave the U.S. and get back in? Avi, one-line answer to that question?
I mean, it depends
So
on whether
what we have here, this person is either a Canadian or a Mexican national, and she is in the U.S., and she is not had a vaccination, and she wants to leave, go home for the holidays and come back in. Is she getting back in? I think the answer is no. She's not getting back in, correct?
Well, it's correct, unless you're coming in through the land border, and it's before they go to the new rules. So essential work or essential travelers at the land border still can come back if they're unvaccinated.
Up until January 22, right?
Correct. But if flying back, then no.
Flying, no. So there's your correct answer. Sorry, it took 2 bites. I only get through this with Avi. By a land border, yes. Flying, no. And after January 22, by land, no. Correct?
Unless you qualify for one of the limited exceptions.
And, good luck with that. So this is very heavy pressure. Are marriage visas moving? Yes, you noticed right in the beginning, the exemption was for immediate relatives. So you married a citizen or permanent resident. Yes, you may find your case moving, but it's still going to be moving incredibly slowly. We've seen cases taking forever. Is H-1B considered urgent travel? Avi mentioned a situation that is similar to the TN situation. From border, yes, you are. For border travel, yes, you are. considered to be essential, but after January 22. Avi, answer that question in the global context, because I think this person is probably traveling from India or one of the South Asian countries. They have an H-1B visa. They have not been vaccinated, apparently. Any luck?
Unlikely, no. I think you carry it over to, well, what if they don't have a valid visa, and how do you qualify for an expedite? Your typical H-1B is not going to be considered, urgent in and of itself. You really have to be able to tie it to what are the critical reasons for your absence and how it impacts your U.S. employer to be able to qualify for an expedited visa appointment. Otherwise, you're just going to be waiting like everybody else for a visa interview.
So that, I think, is the critical point, and thank you for making it again, is that the issue is not just the vaccination requirements. The issue is also, the vaccination requirements are the focus, but at this point, there's that other issue of getting an appointment at an American consulate, and good luck with that, because there's very few appointments available for certain countries. Let's go with this next one. How about an H-1B visa holder from China? Can they travel outside the U.S. and come back? We will initiate a perm. Well, that's not going to change it. Avi, I think the answer for the person from China is identical to the answer you just gave on the prior H-1B. Is that correct, sir?
Yeah. If you've got a valid visa and you're vaccinated and you take your negative COVID test, you're good.
And just practical implementation, how does that change if you're a U.S. permanent resident?
You're not subject to the vaccination requirements, but you do need the negative COVID test within a day of coming back.
And the self-attestation, right?
Correct. Correct. Got
it. So Dropbox appointments are extended to people with visa expiration last 40 months. So that's a renewal. Is that going to be extended? I think we will probably continue to see visa interview waivers. Dropbox situation should continue, right, Avi?
That's the hope, I think, especially because they've got such limited resources, and that I think that helps quite a bit, not having to deal with the in-person interviews.
These questions are great because they putting this, I think this one we've already answered. This Canadian is an extraordinary individual on an O1. If they leave the U.S. and they return to the U.S. unvaccinated as an approved visa holder, well, you're Canadian, so you're not really a visa, but you have O1 status. I think that is the same answer to the TN. And
Correct.
Could you just repeat it again, please, Avi? The answer, the O1.
So travel by air.
Travel.
Yeah, travel by air, you must be vaccinated or qualify for an exception. Travel by land at the Mexico or Canada land border. If you're considered an essential traveler, then up until that January date, you can come back as long as you're unvaccinated and then comply with the testing and the quarantine rules.
The next question asks about, will travelers be quarantined post-landing? And I think we answered that already. No, but there will be certain self-quarantine requirements. Is waiving the 3-day test valid as in Canada for the US if you got COVID within 14 to 180 days? They're talking about waiving the testing requirement if you are positive. To my knowledge, the answer is no. Can you confirm that or otherwise, Avi?
I believe it has to do with if you had it within the last 90 days, then you may be able to get around the self-quarantine, but the testing is still required. So the self-quarantine is the 7 days unless you've recovered from COVID in the last 90 days.
Right, but that doesn't avoid the need to provide a test, right?
Correct. You still must be tested to show your negative test, yes.
Exactly. All right, the next question, TJ Tijuana says, non-immigrant visa point and wait time, does that reflect? Yeah, Avi already explained, forget about it. That is not the wait time for TCNs in TJ. That's for Mexican citizens. Correct, Avi?
Correct.
Thank you. Do you know of any consular posts near Afghanistan that are helping citizens? This is the most tragic situation. Thank you for raising that. We are working. The reason I went to bed at 2 o'clock this morning, and it probably shows, is working on, and that actually was one of my attorneys calling me who's working on the Afghan cases. We've got literally hundreds of them. I'm trying to switch off my mobile phone because one of my partners is calling me, and we're working on these urgent Afghan cases. Look, we hear various stories that if you pay enough money to the right people, I hate saying that because there's foreign corruption practice. I can't even talk about the encouraging people, but, that's what I've heard, that people paying large sums of money are getting into Pakistan, which seems to be the best and the safest route, but it's incredibly dangerous. People are literally getting killed. So, we are active in this arena. If you can, I've heard that there are some flights going out as well, that there are some flights leaving Kabul, and that people are actually getting travel documents. Again, some of them are paying thousands of dollars, but it's an absolutely chronic situation. Are there consular posts near Afghanistan? The answer is yes. And generally speaking, the consular offices are helpful and sensitive, but the truth is they're totally overwhelmed. So I'm not in a position to say, try and make it to Pakistan. I have heard anecdotally that Pakistan is a place that you may want to try and aim for, and that some people are getting across. Apparently, it depends who's at the border at the particular time you go. Some people are getting out. Some people are not getting out. It is complete chaos and very difficult to give advice, particularly as a lawyer. If you give advice, go to Pakistan, and the person ends up getting shot, then, that's scary. But please feel free to email me offline in regard to any specific facts, but Pakistan would be the answer to your question as the only place that I know that is being moderately sympathetic to Afghan nationals. And of course, it's going to be depending on the facts. Not all Afghans are going to get out. Women and children subject to persecution, people who've helped our armed forces or been employed by U.S. Companies helping the U.S. effort, those are prioritized cases. We are literally handling hundreds of these cases right now, and we have task force working almost round the clock on these. It really feels good to be able to help some people. So for the fully vaccinated, no quarantine. This is correct. No quarantine. Let's go. Let me look at the time. We're a couple minutes over. I like to respect people's time. If I have a valid B visa, which was approved 4 years ago, that's good. Can I travel with a visa for business meeting, noting I am fully qualified from India? Avi, take that question. We have a gentleman who is fully vaccinated. He's from India. He has a B1 visa. Can he come to the U.S. for a business meeting? And the answer is...
Yes, yeah, if
yes,
you're fully vaccinated.
Yes, and more yes, okay? You are able to, but I'm going to caution everybody, you come with a B1, provided it's a business visitor meeting, and you plan to stay here for a short period of time. Say that Covishield is not approved by CDC. Avi, did we mention Covishield on the list? I don't remember seeing it.
I believe it is one of the World Health Organization's
so you are in good
vaccinations.
shape. Yeah, actually, it is on our list. That's why I've encouraged everybody to keep our PowerPoint as a resource. I do think we mentioned Covishield. I'm not familiar with that one. All right, I think we can take these last two. This is a long question. How can someone entering you with Novi to follow CDC post-entry requirements from China to non-HU? I want to come to the U.S. So this is the individual who's from China, does not have the correct, wants to come to the U.S. on their H-1B visa. This is the situation. We spoke about Russians because theirs is not accepted. But I understand that there are a lot of people in China who also are not, who have been vaccinated. This is not the Sinovac or whatever it is. This is another Chinese one that's not recognized. They've got some problems. Summarize, give them some advice, Avi. They have a knee, by the way. This person also has a knee, has an approved national interest waiver.
Not anymore. Not anymore. There is no such thing.
Right. It's been scrapped. So this person,
I mean, the best advice is, and it's easy, maybe easier said than done, is go and get one of the approved vaccines to qualify. Otherwise, you're stuck trying to qualify for an exception. And
those exceptions, as we pointed out, are extremely narrow. So they're on the list. So you have a problem, sir, and you've got to try and find a good vaccine. Otherwise, you've got some serious, serious problems. And I said, sir, that was very sexist. It could be madam. I don't know Okay, I'm currently waiting in the US for approval of my L1. I need a new stamp, aiming to get it from London. Good luck. I'm married to a US citizen. Would this help expediting? So, interesting question. This person's going for an L1 non-immigrant visa, but they do have a US citizen anchor relative. That doesn't per se, under the old rules, if you had a citizen, spouse, or child, you got an exemption. That's pretty much out the window right now, Avi. Is that correct?
Right. That's not an exception based on having a U.S. citizen or permanent resident family member to the vaccination requirements. That was some of the exceptions to the geographic COVID bans, but not for the vaccination rules.
If I'm expecting an approval in the next week, can I book an appointment? Avi, can we book an appointment with only the file number using the receipt? You're not supposed to, but what's your advice on that one?
If you have your receipt number, that's what's required on the DS-160. I don't think you have to, they don't mind that you pay the visa application fee before you have the approval, but you obviously must have the approval before you go in and apply for your visa.
Folks, I'm going to respect everybody's time. I've answered all the questions. We are 7 minutes over. Thank you, Kimberly, for the lovely comment that this was very helpful. Please spread the word. And last but not least, I need to, I should have done this plug a little bit earlier. This is the next webinar. Please listen, join and listen. Cliff Rosenthal, who is one of our partners, and Mickey Matrician, who's the partner in our Boston office, is going to offer insights on the H-1B CAP registration process. That is Tuesday, November 23 at 11 a.m. And trust me, those two are good. In this presentation, you only got one good presenter. His name was Avi Friedman, the guy who knows everything about consular practice. In next week's presentation, you're going to have two rock stars, Cliff Rosenthal and Mickey Matrician, updating you. So thank you, everybody, for joining us today. That is the end of our presentation for today. And until November 23, take care. Have a wonderful holiday season. And we're going to be sending you this video that you can share with your friends. So thank you so much, everybody. It's been a great pleasure. There's our contact information, Bernard at Wolfsdorf, Avi Friedman. There's our 7 offices, Boston, Los Angeles, New York, Oakland, San Francisco, Santa Monica, and Shanghai. Happy holidays to you all, and travel safely. Try and get vaccinated. Sorry, I have to put that in. Otherwise, you're going to have some problems. Thank you so much, everyone. And that is the end of our presentation for today. Thank you and goodbye.